My GF, 23, cheated, knowing that I suffered from females before and shared my 27 very confidential information. Names changed for confidentiality. I apologize for my grammar in advance. English is not my native language. Before I get into the story of the affair, I need to clarify what I meant by suffered from females. My mother attempted to kill me twice, repeatedly struck me with an electric cord, leaving numerous scars on my back, and emotionally abused me for years. I still have not recovered from this. My older sister groomed, molested, and raped me for 4 years, from ages 7 to 11. She stopped once I confided in a classmate, but she faced no consequences for her actions. Additionally, my grandmother, with whom I lived for 12 years, 6 of which we spent exclusively together, took care of me while I finished school and college, as my mother and sister moved to a larger city for work. During that time, I rarely spoke to my mother, and I had no desire to. When I was 16, my grandmother informed me that we needed to move to a rented apartment because her loan agreement had turned into one that required selling the property. She was drawn into a scam, and although she was an experienced accountant in the past, she failed to obtain her own copy of the contract. As a result, we lost our home, and my grandmother is still entangled in that situation, even after 11 years. As for my father, he took his own life when I was 8. I added this part later. I suppose this is quite a lot for a single individual to endure. Some of my friends are surprised that I still find women attractive. It is because, despite everything, I had a few good female friends and a couple of female teachers to look up to. One of those girls even boldly asked me out, but with my self-esteem being so low at that time, I foolishly thought, "Good joke, Mark," and let that opportunity slip away. Many others showed interest in me, but I did not think much about it. Now, onto the affair. This girl was not my first partner. I broke up with my actual first girlfriend after about 1.5 months together because she had an overwhelming number of red flags. This second girl, Ruby, also had some, though not as many. It turns out, not by a large margin. She was aware of everything I wrote about earlier. She is the first person I ever confided in regarding those experiences. We dated for just over a year and moved in together when she met Chris. Yes, I know him. In fact, we share the same name. Chris, like Ruby, was in college and was obsessed with minks. Ruby had one in the past, which sadly passed away and was memorialized on her shoulder. Chris had 3 living minks, but they didn't stay alive for long, thanks to neglect from his girlfriend at the time and some poisoning. They quickly became friends, especially due to Ruby being very sociable. I met Chris in person, and we discovered a mutual interest in shooting. He even recommended a good shooting range where I could practice archery. However, that was our only interaction. One day, while we were waiting for the bus, I tried to hug Ruby to show my affection and provide her something stable to lean on, but she avoided me, took her friend, and sat nearby. When we returned home, I asked her about that, and she explained it was due to her slight panic stemming from a car accident in her childhood. She had mentioned it even before we moved in together, so I believed her but still felt uneasy. Later, I learned that he was giving her gifts. I was fine with Ruby having male friends as I knew almost all of them. Initially, these gifts were small treats for a starving person, but then they were connected to her other obsession, Genshin. I acknowledged that he had a talent for picking out gifts. However, one day, while lounging on the couch, I caught a glimpse of a particular message from Chris. "Can I lay down next to you?" This made me very uncomfortable. She was aware that I was not okay with her occasional flirting with her friends, and she did it with both genders, and that she often did not clearly state that she was with me when others flirted with her. I expressed to her that Chris's behavior was inappropriate. She agreed and said she would distance herself from him and limit their interactions. I felt a bit relieved, but my instincts were still on high alert. Everything seemed fine for a couple of months until she accidentally let it slip that she was actually still interacting with Chris. I pretended I hadn't heard her, but later, I snooped through her phone. It turned out that she had been studying with him for nearly a month, and after our recent argument, she had asked if she could come over to play with his minks. I confronted her about these study sessions without mentioning the messages I had seen. She claimed she didn't want me to get upset and that Chris was a year ahead of her, which was true, and excelled in a subject in which she struggled. The second part is true. I am unsure about the first. She added that he needed emotional support due to his abusive girlfriend. This made me extremely uncomfortable. She apologized and promised to do better. Later, I came home early due to health issues when she barged in, surprised to find me there. I told her that I was not feeling well. She wanted to go out with Chris, and after some reluctance, I said okay but asked her to come back once the rain started. She agreed and left. It was late October, and the rain did not take long to arrive. She failed to return, not even when it turned into a downpour. She was gone for 2 whole hours. I was furious. Upon her return, I confronted Ruby about it. She became extremely defensive. I issued an ultimatum. It was either him or me. She chose me but went to her parents' house to cool off, which she truly did. She stayed there for a week, after which I called her for a serious discussion. Our conversation ultimately boiled down to my lack of trust in her and that she needed to be honest with me, which began with granting me complete access to her social media accounts. She agreed in an instant, but afterward, I didn't check because I suspected she had deleted anything compromising. Then I made a post in the aita subreddit where everyone said that I was wrong for not leaving her. I felt the same way, and this confirmed it. Ruby became particularly attentive and affectionate after that conversation, but I felt repulsed by her. Shortly thereafter, I revealed that we could not continue the relationship and needed to break up. She cried and tried to persuade me to reconsider, but she realized that it was futile. She asked her brother to help her move out, and our final awkward interaction was condensed into a couple of days. I also packed her gifts to me because I wanted to move on as quickly as possible. Her brother later called me to say they got home safely, but Ruby had been crying the entire time. She attempted to call me several times, but I let her go to voicemail. Eventually, sometime later, she asked to meet so she could be completely honest with me for closure. However, I no longer needed that. Chris drunkenly confessed to a mutual friend that Ruby had performed sexual acts with him to help him cope with his abusive girlfriend, while knowing that Ruby was my girlfriend at the time. I did not want to inflict further emotional pain upon myself. I wanted to confront her with what I knew and hurl insults, but I decided that silence would speak louder. Deafeningly loud. Later, after a Dungeons and Dragons session, Ariana, her best friend, pointed out that my character was well developed and had some of my traits. I asked her to elaborate, and she explained the character's traumas, relating them to my own story, particularly regarding my sister. I inquired about how she learned this and how much she knew. It turned out Ruby had disclosed my struggles to her, bit by bit. Ariana felt guilty afterward and requested that I not share this with anyone, especially me. However, since Ariana was aware of our breakup, she believed I wouldn't mind her comments. I was furious and disgusted, thus I asked her to inform Ruby that she no longer existed to me. This resulted in Ariana providing emotional support to Ruby during this challenging period. She supported me emotionally after our breakup, not knowing the full reasons behind it at least, until that moment. A few months passed, and I gave up on searching for a girlfriend. I took multiple STD tests and found I was clean. I focused on my passions. While attending a HEMA club, I met an intriguing individual we will call Jess. Jess is a HEMA enthusiast who loved The Lord of the Rings and Pathfinder. I thought we could connect, given my experience as a tabletop role-playing game player and my love for Pathfinder after playing Owl Cat games. She would also appreciate my Aragorn Strider cosplay. But this fiery redhead had other plans. The coaches stated that I had a natural talent with blades, particularly Montante and Saber, which led Jess to decide that I would be her rival. We were both newcomers. Jess had started a month before me. She was frustrated that she could not defeat me in duel, partially due to height difference, though not by much, around 9-10 cm. She also detested my jump scare methods with Myers and Pyramid Head. Yes, she is that one knee main. Despite this, I did not mind losing as long as I was having fun and irritating her. Moreover, I thought she disliked me personally, but I began to notice cheeky grins from other club members. One day, our club went out for drinks to celebrate the founder's birthday at his house. We had a bit too much, or maybe not. This was particularly true when Jess challenged me to a drinking contest, like some sort of warrior. She even attempted to mimic their accent. I accepted, and after 1 or 2 bottles of rum, we found ourselves on the floor wrestling. I managed to pin her down. We stared at one another before starting to kiss, if this mutual face gnashing could even be called a kiss. The others encouraged us to move upstairs to continue, and we did. When we woke up, we were both worn out, exhausted, and desperately in need of water. Fortunately, a few bottles were nearby. Then we both realized we were naked, with our clothes scattered everywhere. Even my underwear somehow ended up on the window curtain. We agreed to keep this to ourselves, but began talking more and bonding a little. We even decided to try cosplaying our Pathfinder characters. A week ago, Jess confessed that she liked me, but since I still had not recovered from Ruby, she understood that we needed to take things slowly. Our rivalry persisted, but it transformed into more of a love-hate relationship. Interestingly enough, club members began betting on whether we would start dating or hook up. Theo, one of those who placed bets, took me to a bar yesterday because he wanted to share his prize money and celebrate us. I am unsure what he meant by that, but we had a fantastic time. As for Ruby and Chris, they attempted to date not long after our breakup. However, she could not cope with his escalating alcoholism or the costs incurred from treating his last surviving mink, so she ended the relationship shortly thereafter. That is all I know about her, and I would prefer to keep it that way. Story 2. Got to witness both sides of a toxic relationship with an extremely unfaithful and abusive partner. I am not sure if this is the appropriate subreddit for this, but this occurred some time ago with a guy who eventually became a close friend. I was 20 years old at the time and had been friends with his girlfriend, who was 19, long before they began dating. However, I became quite close to both of them during their 3-year relationship. I ended up spending a significant amount of time with either one or both of them during that period. He was 24 and knew he did not have to worry about his girlfriend being alone with me because I am gay. Due to this unique situation, where I grew equally close to both individuals, I had the rare chance to observe both sides of the story when everything unraveled. When the girl, whom we will refer to as Alexis, began sneaking around behind her boyfriend, whom we will call Mark, this behavior was not unusual for her. I had known her since childhood. She lived just a few houses away, giving me many chances to observe how she conducted herself in relationships. This long history is also why I did not involve myself when she began cheating. At that point, I had not yet become very close to Mark, having known him for only a few months. Yet, because Alexis knew I could keep a secret, she practically confided in me about everything. Often, I was present to witness things myself. I do not mean that I was in the same room watching another man be intimate with her, although that did occur on a few occasions. Instead, I was usually in the same building or just outside, aware of what she was doing inside. I understood that the only reason she brought me along to various places was to meet one of her many side relationships, most of whom I also got to know fairly well, even forming close friendships with 2 of them. As far as I am aware, Alexis started being unfaithful with one of the 2 guys I also became close friends with. Their connection began innocently enough when he started hanging out more frequently with Alexis and me while Mark was at work or resting during the day. When Mark discovered the other guy spending so much time with us, Alexis introduced him to Mark as her sister's friend, with whom she had developed a friendship. The way they met was true, but he was much more than just a friend to her. Over time, he became far from the only new friend in her life. Mark did not seem to start questioning things until his girlfriend's behavior became significantly more suspicious. She began spending long periods away from him, giving him excuses she made up on the spot. At times, she even had the nerve to tell him some of the most absurd lies I had ever heard. For the longest time, I was baffled by Mark's unwillingness to see through the lies Alexis was presenting him as the undeniable truth. Her behavior eventually created tension between them, leading to frequent arguments, many of which I witnessed. Some of these disputes became quite intense. However, Mark still wanted to make the relationship work, despite the escalating severity of their conflicts. Even when Alexis pulled a knife on him one evening while the 3 of us were socializing in his kitchen, he was not convinced to leave. He later told me that it was not the first time she had attempted to stab him, so he had likely become accustomed to it by then. To make matters worse, Alexis routinely accused Mark of being unfaithful, despite acknowledging to me that she was fully aware of how devoted he was to her. She would accuse him of cheating over the most trivial matters. Mark merely looking in another woman's direction longer than she deemed acceptable was sufficient grounds for her accusations. She made him stop communicating with any female friends he had prior to their relationship. He could not like any photos posted by other women on social media, and he was not allowed to speak directly to women other than her, even in innocent contexts. Of course, there were times when she allowed exceptions for him to talk to women, but those exceptions only arose in unavoidable situations, such as interactions with cashiers or restaurant servers. Even in the few instances when she permitted this, if their conversations sounded too friendly for her taste, she would lose her temper. In the best-case scenarios, she would initiate pointless arguments. In the worst scenarios, she would start physically assaulting him the moment it was just the three of us again. Frequently, she utilized these unnecessary conflicts as a disguise, offering her, legitimate, reasons to avoid him for a while, allowing her to cheat without raising her boyfriend's suspicions. As mentioned earlier, she had many men she regularly saw. I am unsure of the exact number. I know of at least 7, but I will not detail the drama that unfolded in relation to any of them, as this post would become overly lengthy. Instead, I will skip to the last few months of their relationship when her inability to remain loyal resulted in a pregnancy she was genuinely distressed to discover. She had very little idea about who the actual father might be, and all this transpired just a couple of months after Mark unexpectedly walked in on undeniable evidence of Alexis's actions during her graduation ceremony. Her younger sister inadvertently disclosed the truth to him, which profoundly affected him. After this incident, he and I began to develop a much closer friendship. We became so close that I eventually had to ask Alexis to stop sharing details about her sexual escapades. I was starting to feel guilty about the overwhelming amount of information I was concealing from Mark. There was so much wrong with their relationship. She could be unfaithful while demanding his loyalty. Some of the men she was involved with were friends Mark had considered his closest in high school. My guilt increased exponentially when I fell on hard times and became homeless, only for Mark to open his home to me after Alexis asked him to help me out. It was actually his parents' house, but only Mark and his brother-in-law lived there. He had to sneak me in to avoid being seen by the brother-in-law, as his parents and sister, who had married the brother-in-law, were particularly racist and homophobic, and I knew I was not supposed to be there. At that time, I simply had no other options available. You can imagine how terrible I felt that he was taking such a significant risk for me, while I had an extensive knowledge of Alexis's misdeeds, both before and after her graduation ceremony, where Mark only learned about 2 of them. I also knew the cheating continued even after I asked Alexis not to tell me anything more. Although she agreed to stop, she found ways to indirectly share information or made it so obvious that I had no doubts about what she was up to. What prevented me from saying anything was the length of time I had known Alexis. She had become almost like a sister to me and had always treated me well during that time. She did not display any of the toxic behaviors in her friendships that she openly exhibited in her romantic relationships, though that has since changed, or I would not even be writing this. However, as I grew closer friends with Mark, being practically her only confidant became an increasingly difficult role to manage. The weight of carrying a growing list of her betrayals became more than I could bear. I thought I had made this clear to her when I requested to be left uninformed about certain matters. So imagine my surprise on the day she learned of her pregnancy when she told me that I had to inform Mark that the baby was his, as she was certain he would actually take my word for it. You see, she did not just want Mark to be the father. She absolutely needed him to be because he was by far the best candidate out of everyone she had been with. Yes, Mark lived in his parents' home, but it was by choice and not necessity. He had a steady job and income, and he was still trying to make things work with her, even after finding out that she had cheated on him multiple times with multiple men. Above all, what truly attracted her to Mark was the fact that his family had money. All the other potential fathers had significant issues Mark did not have, ultimately preventing her from believing they would be suitable fathers for her baby. They were either equally unfaithful, broke, addicted to drugs, some were felons, one was underage, along with numerous other factors she was not seeking in a father for her child. She truly expected me to lie to him about something that would alter his entire life. I could not believe how far she was willing to go with her deception, leading to a heated argument between us. When I eventually spoke to Mark, I did not disclose anything I knew he did not already understand. I could have done so, but felt highly conflicted about the entire situation. What I shared with him was that he should only sign the birth certificate after they performed a DNA test. At the time, he seemed uncertain about that advice but later expressed gratitude for having followed it, as it turned out the baby was not his. Their relationship ultimately ended. Mark moved to another state, and we lost contact for several years. I have spoken to him since. This all happened about 10 years ago, and he appears to be doing significantly better. He has repeatedly thanked me for the sound advice I provided him that evening, as it seems his ex nearly manipulated him into signing away 18 years of his life. I genuinely felt I owed him that much since he helped me during my difficult time, and because I was aware of the ugly truth about his ex the entire time. He was always mindful that I likely knew far more than I was admitting, but he also recognized the uncomfortable position I was in, and fortunately, he never held it against me after everything came to light.